Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our ACODIS AWS Well-Architected Framework LinkedIn Live. My name is Lisa Bushka, and I lead external communications and thought leadership at ACODIS, a global digital engineering consulting firm that partners with organizations worldwide on complex technology challenges. It's my pleasure to be moderating today's discussion. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that you should feel free to post questions in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them during the session, and if we don't get to them live, we'll follow up shortly thereafter. Today, our focus is on cloud, a technology that underpins how organizations scale, innovate, and operate, including platforms powering this very discussion. More specifically, today we'll be talking about AWS, and how ACODIS supports clients worldwide on their cloud journeys. And with that, I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists, tech experts from around the world who really bring this topic to life. And before we begin, it's really worth noting that one of our panelists quite literally is bringing the cloud to life today. And that's someone that is none other than James Bromberger.
Good morning, Lisa. How are you?
I'm doing well, James. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
James is our Vice President of Cloud Infrastructure and Cybersecurity, and he's also our Global AWS Cloud Practice Partnership Lead. He joins us from Australia, so welcome, James.
Thank you, Lisa.
Our second guest is also joining us from Australia. His name is Usman Satish, and Usman is a senior engineer who's been deeply involved in delivering many of our major cloud engagements for clients over the past almost 4 years. Welcome, Usman.
Thank you, Lisa.
And last but certainly not least, we are delighted to welcome Jason Binns, joining us from the UK, just outside of Oxford. Jason is ACODIS's AWS practice lead for the UK, and he plays a key role in supporting client cloud journeys across the region. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Lisa.
So with that, I think we should spend a few minutes getting to know each of you just a little bit more. So James, let's start with you. As I said, you lead our global AWS cloud practice, and you spent nearly 3 years working at AWS itself.
I did.
Yeah, and so my notes say that you might be among the longest certified AWS professionals out there.
By happenstance, I think it's correct. It's so I joined Amazon Web Services in, I think it was April of 2012. So we're talking, what's that, 14 years ago? Quite scary when you think about it. And at that time, there was no AWS cloud services in Australia. It was a long way away from where we are today, where it is almost ubiquitous. And I joined to take on effectively a solution architecture role there as the security lead for all of Australia and New Zealand. And so it was a very exciting time because one of the things we got to do was to launch the original Sydney region back in 2013. And during my time there, Amazon started to beta test the certification process internally, using the internal staff as guinea pigs on the process. And of course, when you work for the company and you have to sit a certification, you've got to think, what happens if I don't pass this? But luckily, everybody in the cohort passed it. And it's been one of those things that I've really enjoyed and kept that certification now ever since then. Whereas I think a lot of others that I did those certifications with in that very, very first intake, they may have lapsed. So that does make it one of the longest in the world now. And there's many more certifications that have come along since, which I've picked up, but not all 12, which is one of my things in the back of my mind to take on.
That is amazing. Thank you. Thank you for that background. So Usman, turning to you next, you are a senior solutions architect and engineer working on large AI, ML, cloud, and a variety of data solutions for our government and education clients. You are heavily certified by AWS with 8 concurrent certifications in the cloud space. So I guess my question to you is, what's the secret to having highly reliable digital workloads that meet expectations of clients?
Good question. So when we are designing workloads, we need to make sure that they are well architected. So if we follow the pillars of well architecture, which is operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, optimization, and sustainability, you can get a really good workload that sort of maintains itself so that you can focus on actually delivering value and the solutions and the business needs.
Okay, thank you for that. And that'll certainly serve us well as we dive into the discussion. And Jason, I guess before we get into the heart of things, you lead our AWS practice in the UK, and you work really closely with clients across the region. Can you share a little bit about your background and how long you've been working with AWS and what led you into your current role?
Sure, yeah. So although I'm a recent joiner at Acodis, I'm no stranger to the AWS work area. So I've been using AWS probably in production now for about 14, 15 years. Some very large organizations, some in the government and defense space, some in the larger kind of banking and retail banking space. And for me, it's as we move into those kind of conversations, it's really about extracting as much value as possible from the platform.
Okay, thank you so much. I think with that foundation in mind, let's get into it. So my first question is pretty broad here, and whoever wants to jump in, feel free to start the conversation going. Who is actually using AWS Cloud today?
I think it's a huge ecosystem. And one of the things that is sometimes difficult to determine is it's hard to check who's using AWS on some of the digital solutions and platforms that we see online, unless there's public disclosure somewhere that that's what's happening. And I'm thinking back to one from many, many years ago. It was a photo sharing website called SmugMug. And Don McCaskill was the CIO there and CEO. They adopted a lot of AWS in the early years, and you had no idea until you'd seen evidence from them talking publicly about that. But today, I guess the reference customers that we see are some huge percentage of the Fortune 500 companies. They've got workloads on there which are mission critical, which are fault tolerant, which are potentially internally facing and never see the outside world of the internet at all. On the flip side, there's other examples of public-facing services which do run from there. So the classic one is a state government website in whatever jurisdiction, but also things that were used during the pandemic to support first responders, a lot of medical applications. We've done some with some medical organizations where we've got IoT connected mannequins, and the back end of processing that data is on the AWS cloud. But using the mannequin, you wouldn't realize that this simulation of a body is actually internet connected and is using the AWS cloud in the back end. The rest of you, have you guys got some other good examples that you'd like to look at that are publicly known?
Well, I want to talk about AWS can be used by anyone from individual developers, startups, and you could go all the way to big organizations, governments, and it's very accessible because of the range of technologies available. Any solution, most solutions that you want to build, it's got services on there for most use cases, and you can activate any level of security that you want, as long as you understand the shared responsibility model and secure your workloads appropriately. So that's what I would add, that it's very accessible for anyone to use. It doesn't matter what the workload size is.
Yeah, and I think I could build on that a little bit by sort of some of my experience around first cloud adoption really was around the idea of taking large workloads from existing on-prem deployments and moving them almost like carbon copying them into the cloud. The idea of cost reduction and cost optimization. Now, as this has moved on, we're now seeing cloud native applications developed in-house using suites of technologies like AWS's internal services rather than using hand-coded or open source technologies. So you've got some level of assurance that software is going to performance as designed. And as we move forward there, again, we're going to look at sort of things like the use of agentic AI and some of the other technologies coming in there that will allow streamlining that technology. So those are the kinds of areas that I'm seeing in the kind of engagements I'm working on.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for that context. I mean, I think it's fair to say literally the whole world is using the cloud. And, you know, with that, I guess I would like to maybe zoom out a bit and ask from your perspective, how would you describe ACODIS's journey and the role in its role in the AWS cloud ecosystem? What's the story of how we work with AWS and support clients today?
That's probably a good one for me, since I've been here for most of that journey. So I joined ACODIS in 2014, directly from AWS because of a major engagement that the organization had won here in Australia, which was to migrate the land registry, the ownership of property, into the public cloud. And I'm really pleased to say that the team that we put together and the engagement we have with the client means that workload has been live in production on public cloud for over a decade. 10 years of running, patching, and maintaining that. And so when I joined, actually, I should rewind a few months. Just before I joined ACODIS, I was invited by a few people at AWS to participate in creating a new program that would help customers design cloud deployments that would meet their expectations on reliability and operations. And obviously where we're getting to on this is that program was well architected. And so I had a few internal meetings on that initially, loved the idea of having a balance. And we brought that into ACODIS in 2014 when I joined for that very first project. The company had done a few other workloads prior to me joining. Actually, there was one for a state police force where we were actually exposing the enterprise services bus for the state police group to mobile phones, something that they had never done before in 2012, I think that was. Because up until then, police officers who were looking for suspects had to rely on radio communications, and they didn't have a picture of what they were looking for. So, for example, if you're looking for an individual or a suspect, you get a good description over the radio. You get a much better idea when you can see a photo. And so that's the start of when, I guess, law enforcement and policing started to step up into the digital age to understand that there is a lot more than just mobile phones and digital radio channels. You actually need to get images and contextual information out to officers. So starting from 2012, that's a long 14-year history now that ACODIS has been delivering solutions and helping clients in using public cloud as privately as necessary and as required by the workload that they're using. That's grown quite a lot since then, though, I've got to say.
Yeah, wow, that is quite a long history for sure. You know, you mentioned this, and it is the topic, the focus area of this whole talk today, but I really want to pause here on this concept that gets referenced a lot, and that is, you know, it gets referenced a lot in AWS discussions, but it isn't always clearly defined, especially for those of us who aren't engineers. And that is, what exactly is this well-architected framework? And why is it such an important foundation for cloud environments?
Would one of you guys like to have a go, or shall I have a bite at this one?
Oh, James, since you're instrumental in it. Oh, well, Satish,
as you said, Jason, I mean, you can make a carbon copy of a digital solution in the cloud. And like for like, you might find that it operates, but it might not be optimal. And optimal has a number of different perspectives on it. Cost optimization is one that gets bandied around a lot. And people used to say that cloud would save them money without any context as to how or why or where that savings would be realized. And that balance was that sometimes you need to modify the way that digital solutions work. There's more than one way to implement these things to strike the correct balance for that client. I mean, everyone knows the easiest way to optimize cost to zero is to turn off all your digital systems. It's amazing how slow they run when you turn the computers off. But actually, that's not the best outcome for the client. There is a balance between a number of competing angles that you would look at these things for. And efficiency is one of those, the reliability efficiency, but also the operational excellence that Usman talked about. And I want to just pick on something else that Usman said about shared responsibility model. That's a key thing. We have customers may not realize the responsibility they have in maintaining and securing their digital workloads. Quite often you see some organizations minimize the amount of operational support they do for their digital workloads, and sometimes they get exposed or breached because they hadn't updated or patched these things. And I'm thinking back here to one that you guys may remember, which was the log4j exploit that happened a while back, which was a major panic because log4j is a little obscure programming library hidden inside lots of different projects. And when these projects and commercial offerings create their software solution and sell it, it's buried in there, that exact version they had. And there was an identified exploit that came out, which meant all of that software had to be updated. Now, for some people, they had the updated software, but they didn't get it deployed. Well, that's no good. That's like saying I was going to lock my doors to the house, but I accidentally left them open, but I got robbed anyway. No, you've actually got to take these actions and follow through them. When these updates are available, it's your responsibility to action them sometimes and make sure they happen. That's where the operational excellence comes in, is having the agility to make these changes over the lifespan of your solution that's going to be running. And with that, I'll pause for a second and see if the rest of the guys want to get into it.
Well, I'd like to come in a little bit on that. So one of the core pillars is security, and one of the things that kind of about that is the concept of security monitoring and logging. So this is classical CM function. And what I find increasingly happening is a conversation around observability versus monitoring. So monitoring is kind of, you're sort of seeing the state of the system now, what it's doing, and it's quite reactive. So whereas observability tends to work around the concept of slightly longer running processes. So you say you've got a series of steps in a process to execute the process end to end that may traverse several pillars or sort of components within an end-to-end solution. The entire execution time is what we call the span in SRE speak. That is something that you need to be able to surface in detail, and AWS has a lot of tools built into it to allow you to do that. Whereas if you're using multiple vendors' tool sets, you find yourself in a situation where even though you can abstract a little bit, you're still being very reactive. And then, of course, you've talked about compliance a little bit. Things like encryption at rest, encryption during travel. These are all very important topics, not just for my customer. I mean, they're good practice anyway, but those are things that should really be looked at. And then perhaps over to you, Usman, if you've got any more insights.
So when I am designing a solution, I often wonder, am I designing the best solution for the best outcome? And the well-architected framework provides the guardrails for you to be able to build a well-architected cloud system. And how do you evaluate whether you are meeting those framework guidelines? So I consider the well-architected framework, going through the questionnaires and actually evaluating where you are with the solution. And that's useful to get what the next action steps are to move towards that. Some of it has to do with making sure that you're able to patch systems in time, patch it automatic. Are you patching live systems, or are you actually like replacing them? If you have immutable infrastructure, it's easy to deploy onto updated versions of softwares, or change like function versions and stuff like that. The other thing which I'd like to touch on is, as long as you're constantly building and things are changing, it's useful to reevaluate where you stand on that well-architected. You might introduce a new service. It might have like less redundancy than you actually want for your workload. It might just be two AZs where you might actually have to require it running in 3 AZs for your traffic. So that's sort of where I see it useful to do a well-architected preview on your workload.
I think also one of the things is that the answers as to what does well architected look like morphs over time. And I can think of a classic one we saw back, and I'm going to go way back now to about 2016. So we're going back 10 years ago. We were asked to implement a web-based API for a client that would be interfaced from their another organization, a partner organization they had. And we spec'd up what that infrastructure cost would look like per month, and it was something like 50 euros, $60, 100 Australian dollars a month. And we looked at that and thought that was okay, but there was a new technology that had just been made available within the jurisdiction of the client, and that was the serverless paradigm of Lambda, which is where we can, instead of running virtual machines, we can take code and ask for the code to be run on behalf of our client on demand without having to schedule it or have virtual machines running. And it was new, so we had to experiment and learn, and we had to adjust what well architected looked like when we didn't have the traditional controls that we've been used to in the IT industry for the last 40, 50 years or so of POSIX and things like that. And the end result was that we managed to actually change the cost of that from being around $100 a month, Australian, to about $6 a month. We're talking an order of magnitude and a half change, the cost of a cup of coffee generally, because it fitted the right requirements of the client. And at the end of the day, this was a public sector client. And so we knew any architectural changes we were doing to align the cost profile of the digital solutions was actually coming out of public money, which is, to the end of the day, it's our money as taxpayers that we've spent. So highly motivated our team was to try and make sure that we adopted and evaluated the changing cloud ecosystem as it happened to meet what well architected might look like. And this is probably going to change again in the future. So it's not a done deal of, right, we're done, everything's perfect in technology, we'll stop inventing stuff now. Because if we did that in 2016, we wouldn't have seen a number of technologies over the last 10 years. And I'm thinking of blockchain, I'm thinking of the AI boom we're seeing at the moment. There's a few others in there. It's always new things that are coming in there.
So
Yeah.
James,
Go ahead.
Lisa. So James, you've mentioned 10 years and you've mentioned the evolution of well architected. So we have a pillar that was added sometime, sustainability. Right. Would you know when that was added? That's obviously an evolution of that framework.
I'm going to say it's around, I'm going to be wrong here and someone's going to find me because I'm going from the top of my head, but I think it was around 2018 or 2019. And what's interesting is that sustainability, it does overlap with some of the other pillars. So if you're sustainable, you're probably using something like less compute power. Less compute power probably means that your solution is using less electrical power in the data centers. And of course, if you're using less electrical power, there's less cooling in those data centers. So you're using less water. So these things kind of align. You go, well, how do I make this as operationally efficient as possible? And so serverless has had a great big input into that. But it's not right for every solution. And we balance this, particularly if we're using commercial off-the-shelf software where we don't have source code, then no. And even still, you might want to try and think about, well, is it the right thing or not? And what's the supportability of that going to be with the team going forward? So yeah, that pillar was interesting, but I think it does overlap with many of the other ones. But it leads you to the better outcome for the clients. And I can't think of many organizations that don't want a more sustainable way of operating, because particularly if that aligns with their cost optimization. The two go hand in hand.
And let's not talk about the elephant in the room. Costs of electricity globally are going to go up in the current situation. So if you're thinking about more efficient code requiring less cores, requiring less CPU output altogether, that can reduce your carbon footprint quite significantly. Another area I'd like to kind of just explore, another one of the pillars, is around the concept of multi-AC availability. So and it's a balancing act, certainly in the customers I'm dealing with, who on the one hand would love the idea of being able to, as they scale, move and redundantly fail over to multiple availability areas within their own region, or potentially even globally. However, there are a lot of regulations here in the EU and the UK that say the data must reside inside the UK. And so AWS is one of the sort of premier suppliers that are actually guaranteeing sovereignty on their data centers. So you can actually get that certified, and that's quite a powerful tool in their toolbox.
It's worth breaking down that AZ phrase that you used there, called an
Oh, sorry, availability.
I know. I think we've touched on it a few times. We're so used to it because it's one of those building blocks that we know is that fault tolerant layout, where an availability zone is a cluster of data centers, and each of the regions that we would use, such as the London region, is made up of multiple clusters of data centers. And so the fault tolerance might be that some of the data centers are in West London, some of them in South London, some of them in East London. And applications can be architected to use as many or as few of those as you need, depending on the prioritization of the client. And I think for some of the best workloads I've seen, there's an episode that we had back in 2016 where we had a multi-AZ deployed critical government application. And there was actually an availability zone incident. But because we'd followed all of the well-architected principles and we'd actually deployed everything to make sure that it could be automatically restarted without human intervention, this massive incident was just an informational event for us, which happened on a Sunday at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think I was about 300 kilometers away from my home on holiday with my family when I got one message that said, a failover has started, and then another message 2 minutes later that said, yeah, it's all finished, the failover's done. It's like, okay. And then obviously on inspection, yes, the incident had happened, but it had been handled gracefully and without waiting for someone, me or one of the team, to wake up and actually take an action to trigger that. So it was impressive to see it in action, even though it might have been holding my breath for a couple of seconds.
Okay, well, thank you for this really thorough discussion. I think, for me, again, one of the biggest takeaways from this is just the well-architected framework is truly about optimal design of a cloud system for a client, and that encompasses basically everything from compliance to efficiency, sustainability, legal, regulatory items, etc. So taking that, I'd like to dive a little deeper, and you alluded to this in some of your discussion. What's a well-architected review? And I mean, I think we can all kind of infer what that means, but can you talk a little more in detail about what that is?
Lisbon, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So a review is, we look at a well-architected, we look at a workload. I say well-architected because that's a baseline that I would normally try to aim for when we start, however small the workload is. But we look at a workload, whether it's well-architected or not. We do an evaluation of its architecture, the principles around which it's built, and we measure that up against the framework. And we see how it scores against that framework, and we come up with actions, against the particular pillars that we spoke about, which would help to improve that posture, and make the workload more, operationally excellent or secure, reliable, or efficient, or better cost.
So to get a little more granular here, Usman, can you give me like an example of a workload, and perhaps what would be the impetus for clients to choose to do a review on a workload?
Yeah, absolutely. So it could be possible that a workload's been set up when technologies, it could have been set up a couple of years ago and hasn't really evolved with new technologies, because that takes some work, some effort to actually do that. And people are they're trying to evolve their software, they're building against business requirements, and sometimes it's not actually looked at like, hey, can we actually do this better? No one looks at a review. No one reviews the workload to see if things can get better. The cloud itself is constantly evolving. If anyone's looked at AWS's What's New page, it is very difficult to consume, because on a daily basis, or at least twice weekly, there's like several features that come up. It's very, very difficult to keep up to date. And for anyone with the workload, they could benefit from those features. And sometimes it's worth having, a look back at the workload and reevaluating against whether now with the new evolution of technology, if things can be done in a better way. So I guess, for example, it could be, a lot of older workloads are running on virtual machines, but then perhaps they might be just doing like singular transactions, asynchronous, and they don't really have to run on 24/7 servers. They can be run on functions that can switch on, service that request, and then switch off. And so you only pay for the cost of actually running that. So the couple of seconds that it's run, and the invocation and the exit. So that's probably an example, of you have a look at the workload and think like, okay, well, you could get some cost savings here. Or sometimes it could be something else. It could be that a workload is running on a very high spec, perhaps because they just wanted the responses to be faster, but no one's actually looked at the load on that to see that it's only using 50%, and you could get, you could downsize that workload. It could also be that, hey, you've had this workload running for 3 years, pay on demand, but you could actually have reserved instances, reserve it for 3 years. You're going to be running this. So it's useful to go back and have a look at some of these things, whether it's about the principles or it's the architecture or the way it's designed, and you might have a better way to do it.
Thank you.
I saw one customer who hadn't taken any real action in their cloud environment for a couple of years. Their reservations were expiring, and actually the work they should have been doing was actually patching and updating their virtual machines in order for them to then adopt newer types of virtual machines, which came at a lower cost. But because they hadn't done the updates, they couldn't move forward. They were stuck. And really that maintenance and updates should have been happening continuously. So it highlights potentially some things which are endemic to the way that organizations may be running, which may be suboptimal. But I had another one which I really loved, which was when a client was about to go live with a brand new workload for the first time. They didn't have any experience or background in how it was going to operate. This workload was internet facing. It was a public facing service, but they asked us to come and check out their workload. So our team actually I think it was out of Bulgaria, our global delivery center there, reviewed this workload and made a bunch of recommendations before going live. So before they had that, oh my God, this is overused, or the bill is not what we expected, or we now need to go back and circle back on security. Those things were looked at before going live, which stopped any kind of massive failure that could have happened. So there's a number of good points of times to do these things.
So that's a really interesting point that you just mentioned. You mentioned that we stepped in and we looked at it and made some suggestions. Why would an organization choose to work with an external partner to conduct a review?
Jason,
I'd probably take that. I'd say one is we don't bring any external or internal bias with us. So we will give a kind of transparent lens on the current state of your environment, whether that's deployed or something you're planning on doing. A good example of that might be someone's responding to something like a security incident, or someone's got a quarterly really high bill that they weren't expecting. It's not been budgeted for, it's not been forecasted. So some sort of incident or event's taking place in the business. Or maybe it's actually a new product launch, could be an M&A activity. Those kinds of activities may kick off a WAF type. From the piece of work we normally look to deliver would be a sort of time-boxed, totally impartial view of the workload with a guaranteed statement of what it concludes and what the outcome looks like in a sort of standard deliverable, really. It's a standard consulting engagement. That's kind of what I would suggest.
I think the thing is that for most consultants in this space, it's not your first rodeo. You've been working in the clouds, as you said, Jason, for a decade and a half, Usman, again, a long time. That's the experience that you want to bring in, that the existing team that you might have in-house or a third party may not have that level of experience. And so a fresh set of eyes, I think, starts to highlight areas where there could be changes. And those changes may be in the technical environment. It may actually be in the organizational structure to try to set up your organization to be more efficient and effective to respond to changes in the technical environment that may happen in the future.
Okay, great. So, Jason and team, whoever wants to take this one, can you tell me, like, how frequent would these reviews be conducted? Can you talk a little bit about the frequency and how it varies possibly from organization to organization?
Probably James, you probably delivered more than most of us on these.
Well, it's interesting.
Throwing the ball.
Catch over here. Look, it depends on the client. As it's a report, it's a point in time status check. And we find that for a lot of clients, sometimes that's a useful artifact to have. And it's a useful artifact to revisit later, particularly a year later, because the delta between last year and this year is an indication of your organization's ability to address your technical debt. Now, technical debt is the thing which you're going to fix up at some stage, but you've not got around to it yet. That kind of overhead grows and grows over time. Sometimes you need a document to say, here is the assessment of how that's grown, and we need to apply more effort to buy down this technical debt. And that could be changing the way that your existing teams are operating, maybe adding more people into that, maybe stopping doing things which aren't addressing that technical debt. There's some balance that has to happen across these things. I think of a classic one that, security is a changing game all the time, and removing outdated encryption technologies from your network stack is one of those things that sometimes people just put off because they haven't done it before. They're not sure what it looks like, and they don't have the confidence to do it. Well, I'm pleased to say it's one of the things my teams have been really great at doing. You get the logs, you review what's being used, you turn off the old stuff which isn't being used, or if you identify in the logs it is being used, you've got to then go and find out from that client why. And I guess that's where the experience of the team is why you would call in an external independent party who's done this not just once or twice, but done this for probably the longest in the ecosystem. Leverage that experience on what is effectively just a couple of days worth of engagement, get that report, and then figure out what you want to do with that afterwards. We don't insist that people have to work with us going forward. We've got that knowledge. We'd love to work with people. But if they just need our insight, this is a mechanism that the clients can engage us by to get the Acodus experts with the years of experience that we've got to bring some light into their environments. Talking of light into their environments, I think Usman needs to turn his lights on again because it's actually 8 o'clock at night. It's very late for him at the moment, isn't it?
It's 10, but the lights are off.
So what I'm gathering from this is, if we look at the range of clients that are out there, those that benefit or that can benefit from such a review are not only new cloud environments, organizazations that have new environments, but also more mature ones, correct? And obviously needs change based on what they're facing.
Absolutely.
I would say anyone longer than 3 years in the cloud. If it's been more than 3 years since a qualified set of eyes have looked over something, you're probably leaving money on the table from cost optimization and possibly a bunch of security optimizations that are missed out as well.
I also often find that people are very busy building because from the point of a business, they're always building stuff, and often in the delta between a well-architected workload to when they've had to skip steps and cause technical debt, that increases as time goes by because no one goes back and looks at cleaning it up. So that's there in every organization, I would think.
Yeah, it's that kind of just in time fix it, or you get an intractable technical position between two parties, and you go, well, let's compromise on something that's just good enough to get to the next step, then finish the next sprint, deliver the next feature in your pipeline, and that's how it accrues over time. Because at some point, something deprecates. The other thing it's worth just as another viewpoint on WAF is there are lots of things that we're talking about, things becoming available really quickly and quite the sort of velocity and the choppiness in the service catalog from AWS changing on a weekly or monthly basis. There are also things being deprecated. So some of the services you may have built on with a lens of maybe a 1 or 1.5, 2 years time planning horizon maybe being replaced by something arguably better, or that would require a code change to allow you to continue operating in that way. And you set of eyes going, well, actually, you might be aware that these two are going out of service and you might want to switch to this technology. That would all come out as part of this process.
Okay, well, with that, I guess we need to kind of begin to wrap this discussion up. And I guess, we talked a lot today about who uses AWS, the well-architected framework, how organizations are getting, value from the cloud. And I hope you can see that ACODIS has incredibly experienced experts like our panelists supporting clients around the world. At this point, James, can I ask you to give our audience just an idea, a little more specifically, of what ACODIS actually offers in terms of an AWS well-architected review?
So the idea is quite simple, and it's pretty commonly done. It's up to 1 week engagement for our team to come and actually work with our clients, take them through the well-architected review questions, and potentially even some custom lenses on top of that. So well-architected can be extended if there's a specific area of capability or concern the clients have got. There are additional lenses, including custom lenses. So we had a client recently who we did a well-architected review for them. They were a state government gaming or lottery system. We did the review for them, and they asked us to come back later and actually add on very specifically some pieces around the Databricks environment. Now, Databricks is an analytics data platform that runs on top of AWS or on top of other cloud providers. And so we actually developed an extended custom lens to frame the well-architected review around what does it mean for running Databricks in there, and how do we actually address the 6 pillars specifically for that workload. So we can do that for our clients if they want. The main way to get in touch would be probably through our website. So if you go to acodis.com or aws.acodis.com, you'll find a heap of information on there in multiple languages. Obviously today we're all speaking English, but our teams are doing this from many locations, from the Middle East through Europe and obviously the US. Basically, I think we've got engineers in about 14 or 15 countries today. So wherever you are, if you'd like to get in contact, please do, and we'll try and work something out either locally or through our global delivery centers.
That is wonderful. And I would say with that, I would certainly just like to say thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you, James. Thank you, Usman. And thank you, Jason. This was a great discussion. And I would also just like to thank everyone watching for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, everyone.
Engineering a smarter future together.